What is going on, everybody? This is Pause here from the R.A.T.S development team, and I'm here to do a relatively small tutorial. I don't know how long this is going to take, but basically I'm going to take this paint that I've created that hopefully you all enjoyed this speed video of, and I'm going to process this through Photoshop, bring it into UDK, and set up the material for it. This is a KubelWagon, which is a vehicle used a long time ago, and it was modeled by my good friend Halfhawk. I want to thank him for that. He did all of the unwrapping, and he did all of the modeling, and he made things very easy for me. And as you can see here, that this is on 4 completely separate UV tiles. Each one of these grid squares is a UV tile, so each segment of the vehicle is on its own basically tile here. And I wanted to point out a couple of things that happened during this speed video that I learned on the way and that I couldn't really do anything about. For instance, one thing I couldn't do anything really about was the tire treads. I wasn't able to show that because I created that in Photoshop. I didn't actually do that in here or in ZBrush or anything like that. It was just easier to make the pattern for the treads there, so that's why that just appeared on the vehicle. And a few times I actually just kind of forgot to continue recording after I paused it and stepped away, so some of these rivets and whatnot were basically kind of missed. I only showed a little bit of it, but really the rivets, I just want to go over how I did that really fast because it's quite easy actually. It does take a little while to process here, and that transfers in the recording, and there's another thing I'll show you guys about what I learned. But for the rivets, really the brush settings are pretty simple. Just use a no stamp spacing and a fall off of this round one here. It kind of just terminates at a nice sharp angle at the bottom. There's no blend outwards at the edge of the brush. And I'll make a few rivets and I'll just undo it, but what I did was set the advanced options here to minimum size and pressure on my pen tablet to zilch, well actually 100%, not zilch. I did have a steady stroke and it was quite high, 8, and you can see that my drag distance is pretty far before it actually starts dragging. And all I gotta do to match the size of one of them is just come here and pretty much match the size, and as soon as that drag gets to the end it will pop 1. That's how you can make just 1 if you need to place it, and if I keep dragging you'll see that they're really close. So let me undo that. So the way to do the distance is your stamp spacing. Now you'll notice that we have a maximum of 100 here, and if you look, that's not far enough. But the magic here is that you can pretty much type in whatever you want there. So now I got a big huge spacing of 500. Okay, and the spacing that I use for these rivets, which I think are probably a little large, and I doubt that the actual vehicle has these rivets on it. I just added them as kind of give it a little bit more of a like a constructed industrial type look. And like I said, I used the spacing at 250, so if you see here and I drag across, that was pretty much the spacing. So pretty simple, not real difficult. Again, it's once you type in, your bar will actually be on that scale, which is nice, except if you go below 100, and I think if you come off the brush and then come back, it will reset that back to 100 at the max here. So you'll just have to type it in again. As long as you don't change anything on the brush, your scale will be on whatever you type. So that was one thing. I need to pause and let the dog in. Hang on for 1 second. Okay. The other thing I wanted to point out here before I start getting into Photoshop is that there was something going on with the texture tiles getting loaded, and I think during the video you probably noticed that the whole model was turning blue in parts, and it was UV segments, each one of these different segments was constantly like getting unloaded and reloaded in, and I was able to actually fix that partway through the video. So you did notice that it stops, and what happened here is come over here to render. It's this use gigatexel engine. Now if I hit that on and hit OK, you can see there it is again, and you see how long this takes. I can't actually do anything while this is happening. I can't paint. I can kind of rotate the model, but it pretty much just lags like crazy. The gigatexel engine is a useful thing if you have the need to basically put gigs upon gigs of textures on it. For instance, like the T-Rex in like the movie King Kong, they used just thousands or hundreds of 8,000 DPI textures, and they were just pouring them on. My computer cannot handle that kind of thing, so anytime you switch a layer, like I just switched to dense, you can see that it lags. It did kind of speed up. If I hit A to zoom out, it will go a little bit faster in loading than normal, but not really. I mean, you can see I'm moving my pen around and it wasn't doing anything. So when that's happening, basically, and you hate it like I did, and I apologize that it took me so long to figure it out during the video, just uncheck the gigatexel engine there and hit OK. And now it still takes a second for me to swap layers, but it's definitely not as bad anymore. So just a little note on that. Alright, now let's actually get into the tutorial here, and the first thing I need to do is I need to get these things out to Photoshop. And what's going to happen is I can just right click on any one of these layers, right click, takes a second, and then export channel to PSD. Now I've already done this, but I need to overwrite because this is old. So what you do is you name it your first thing, and you'll notice here that I've got additional ones for the diffuse. Let me put this on detail so it's a little easier to read. Drag that out, and you can see that I've got my diffuse, and then I've got diffuse, and it automatically created these other three textures. And I got U1 V2, U2 V1, and U2 V2. These are the other tiles. U is the horizontal, and V is the vertical spacing. So if we look, let me get rid of that. If we look at the UV view here, this is U1 V1, which doesn't actually get created as U1 V1. It's just your base name. This is U2 V1 because it's U horizontal is the second one, and it's still the first vertical. Up here we've got U1 V1 because it's one up. Actually, no, this is U1 V2, sorry. And this is U1 V1 over here because it's U1 V1, over horizontal 1, up horizontal 1. So the cool thing is when you do, if you need to paint multiple parts that are going to get put together, you can actually paint it all at one time, and what you'll end up is you'll get 4 Photoshop files with all of these layers. And what I wanted to point out is that over here I have some masks that I'm using, and these masks are basically what I use to just kind of break these stamps up here with painting black and white like your standard masks in Photoshop and whatnot. And what's going to happen is if I export this to Photoshop, and I'll just overwrite yes, you look at plates, has mask 1, and you can see that the plates, well, it's writing right now. It's not going to allow me to do it. It may have crashed. Hopefully not. It'd be a little embarrassing, but like I said, my computer is really not up to snuff for this kind of thing. Alright, so it did work, and it will open up the first one. It doesn't open up all 4 of them, but if you look here at plates, actually it's not on this not on this layer. Let me open up the other ones. Alright, I had to pause it for a second. My dog was going crazy. Sorry for that. Okay, let me find the one that has the plates on it. Okay, here. And you'll notice that there is no breakup of this. The masks that come out of Mudbox do not get transferred over to Photoshop, and that's a bug or an oversight, and it'd be nice if they fixed it. Okay, so the way to get around that is to temporarily, if you hold Alt and you click the I here, you know, to just isolate the selection, you can right click and say merge visible, and that will just combine the mask. If I do the same here on the wheel stamp, merge visible, I always lose it, and I do the same thing here on the decals. Make sure I don't have any other masks, and I don't. And to get everything back, you can just hit the diffuse visibility button there. Okay, and that comes back. So right click, export channel to PSD, and overwrite. Yes. It should ask me to update in Photoshop when this is done. Oh, there's actually one more thing I wanted to point out when this is done. Update. Okay. I'm gonna close them all just to make sure that I get the update over here. And if I come to the U1V2, now you can see that it's broken up like I need it. I never actually did break that up, so I might, let me see if that's on that layer. Yeah, I might just break that up here, or I might go back to Mudbox. I'm not real concerned about this. This is, don't tell anybody I told you this, but this is Half-Ox's birthday. I found that on his Skype. Cheated. Okay, so we get this into Photoshop. So I'm gonna close them down again. And I'll leave this one open. Now what I want to do is minimize that and pop open the specular, and I want to do the same thing for my spec channel. Just export that to PSD, type spec here, that pops that open. Okay. And I want to get my bump map. I believe that I can do this without showing it. I'm going to need to check that. Just going to call that bump. So take a second longer. It's got quite a few more layers than the specular map. Diffuse map has the most layers. I guess it did it. It didn't swap me over. No, it didn't do it yet. Is it working? It didn't do it. Maybe I hit cancel. Those watching are probably laughing. I guess I do have to show the layer. That's interesting. Either that or no, it's doing it. There we go. Alright, and then the bump map came out. And so I'm just going to show all the layers here. One thing that I find really frustrating is that it always, like, I have this dirt copy layer selected, and I'm going to uncheck reflection mask, and you can see it puts my list back up here, so I gotta come back down. The way to combat that is to be actually select one of these layers, and it still puts it at the bottom. It's really irritating. I can't stand programs that reorder where you're looking on their own, especially when you have such a limit. I mean, I can make this smaller, but I can't make it any bigger than that, and I've got a really big list here. So just a note for the developers, please don't have this ever get updated, or the position on it anyway. Okay, and I'm going to call this reflect. This is kind of new for me to create a reflection mask. I haven't really done that, but I found the need, and I think it's pretty useful thing to have. If you look, the tires and whatnot are blacked out. I don't want those reflecting anything. So what I'm going to do is start combining these things into basically two textures. And let me get my normal map out, which is just the one layer right now, but I find it necessary because I did create a normal map from sculpting. It's not going to be on this layer in particular, but it is still going to be a necessary thing. Once you have a lot of files open up here, it gets a little difficult to deal with, but not too bad. So first thing I'm going to do, let's get to the meat of this thing, is just process this main image here on this one layer. And what I like to do is take from above the diffuse background and get all my layers and hit Control Alt E, and what that does is that creates a copy of all of those layers combined. And I'm going to blur this with a pixel value of 8, which I find is good. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 3 copies, and I do that by holding Alt and dragging down, and then I'm going to shift click up here and hit Control E. It's just a simple merge the ones that you want, and I'm going to drag this all the way down to above the base. And what that does is that gives me a little bit of pixel bleed, so that I don't really have any of this background color. But that's another thing that I do want to fix just in case. I'm going to unlock that, and I'm going to hold Alt and isolate the base, hit B and I, or actually not I, sorry, I'm going to hold Alt and just click to sample that color down here, and I'm going to fill in that color. Now there's no way for me to Alt get back those 2 layers here, and I'd have to drag this all the way up, which I find to be kind of slow. So if you right click here and you say show hide all other layers and then do that again, it will kind of speed that process up. I definitely do not want that layer showing. So there is my processed diffuse image map, which is what I need. And now what I want to do is get my specular map into that. So the first thing I'm going to do here is fill in the background with black, because that's what I want. And the rest is pretty simple. I'm just going to go to channels. I'm going to hold Control. You can see my cursor change into a marquee cube and click RGB. Now I'm going to find a spot here where my cursor changes, and now I'm moving this around. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it up to here and hold. Then I'm going to drag it down here. I haven't let go yet, and I'm going to hold Shift and let go, and that will center it. If I delete my alpha channel and then use this button down here, which will capture, you can see that if I switch between these two and hit Control 0, they're identical. No change whatsoever. And that means that I actually don't need this layer anymore, and to be honest, I don't need to save it. So that is the diffuse layer done. I have my specular channel in the alpha map, and that's all I need to do. So I hit Control Shift S, and let's go to my textures folder. I'm gonna actually back up one here. This is where I export all of my meshes and textures and everything. I keep a running backup of this. Vehicles is right here. These are the other vehicles we've done, so I'm just going to make a new folder and call this the KubelWagon. And then I'm going to make a new folder, KubelWagon textures in caps, and that will help me when I use recent places to find that out. And this is going to be a TGA. This is a little off the capture window here, so let me shrink that some. Okay, so I made it a TGA. I have alpha channels checked. I hit save, and I want it 32 bits. If you make it 24 bits, that will remove the alpha channel, so keep it 32. Don't worry about this. Hit okie doke. Now I can hide that. Nope. Okay. Now my bump map, if you look at my normal map that I made, the seats are not on this tile, so I don't actually need to worry about this one. But what I do need to do is create this. So this texture is actually not needed at all. And what I'm going to do is, once again, just hide the mudbox base. And what I'm going to do is select all my layers, including the background, because I need that. That is my base 50% gray color here. And I'm going to hit Control-Alt-E again. What that does is that gives me a copy of everything. And the reason I do that is because in case I don't like the way something comes out, I can always just delete this and fix it here and then come back and do it again. So the filter that I'm going to run is called XNormal. It's freely available on the internets, and all you got to do is just download and install that. Simple Google search ought to find it pretty quick. And the one you want is height to normals. A lot of people use Crazy Bump, and that will give you really good results. But I found that this is fine. And I leave everything pretty much as is. And if I Control-Alt-0, you can see that the normal map, I think, is pretty useful. Comes out pretty nice. Some of these details on here are a little blended out, but that's due to the limited resolution that we're working at here. You can see that these other spots, they look pretty good, and I think it's going to work fine. And what I'm going to do now is what is new for me, and I don't think I've ever shown this before, but I'm going to black that out. I've created this reflection mask, and what I'm going to do is just do the same thing that I did with the specular channel. Just going to Control-click the RGB channel, and I hit M to get my marquee tool here, and I just find a white spot and drag that up here, and then drag it in and hold Shift, and I can get rid of that and show my alpha channel. Okay, that is correct. I'll hide the alpha channel. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save. You can see that recent places is now updated with this location, which is nice. I can do this quicker. And I'm just going to call this NM. Now, in this case, I have an alpha channel. I'm going to hit save and give this 32 bits. And this is my reflection mask. And there's something you need to do in UDK to make sure that that comes through. And I'll show you that when it happens. So now I can come back here, Mudbox 2, and get U1V2, 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 U1V2. I missed the bar. I think there's one more. And open those. Okay. Let's go over to my diffuse and process that really quick. Same thing, just going to select them all, Control-Alt-E. Filter height to normals is the last filter, so I can't hit Control-F, so I got to come back here. Gaussian blur, okay. make 3 copies by alt dragging them just below, Control E, and then drag to the bottom here, put it underneath everything, alt click the base, and alt click it again, unlock this bottom layer, alt backspace will fill that in. Let's get my specular. I want to fill the background with black. I hit D for the default colors. And now I want to kind of find. Let me show you a different way of doing this, because sometimes it's only going to select what's 50% gray or higher, and sometimes it'll say that there's going to be no visible pixels selected. And when that happens, there's nothing for you to grab and drag over there, and it can actually be a problem. So what I do, or what you do, is Control A and then Control C, okay, just to copy it. And then you can come over to your diffuse layer, and what you need to do is actually fill in your alpha channel with black, and then you can hit Control A, Control V. Didn't do that. I don't know why that worked. Didn't work. Let's try that again. Control C, C, a bunch of times. Make sure. And Control V. See, the combined is the only one that's actually going to work. If I go to Edit, Copy, or how about Edit, Copy, Merged? Maybe that's what I need to do. I guess I had to do Copy, Merged. I've never had to do that before. That's weird. But now, it's the other way to do it. I could have dragged it because I had a few pixels, but it would have been kind of hard for me to select them because there's only like 1 or 2 in there, and I had to really been fiddling around with my mouse to try to get it on there. So this works just as fine. I do want to brighten up a couple of things. The one thing being the I think decals here. So I'm going to hold Control to select the decals layer, and you can see I get a couple of other things. And if I hit M, if I hold Alt and Shift, it gives me an X, which is actually a it's like an overlap, so it'll only pick what I overlap here. And what I want to do is come here and hit Control L for my levels, and I just want to brighten that stuff up a little bit. By a little bit I mean a lot. Okay, that should be alright. I think everything else will be fine. The tarp and whatnot, I don't want to have too much specular in there, so we'll go with that and we'll see what we get. I can always come back in here and fix the textures if they're not working out on the material. And I can now save this, recent places, to KubelWagon textures. I'm going to keep the naming convention of U1, V2 because it actually is helpful on telling me where these are. So TGA, and save that. 32-bit, and I can dump that. I'm actually going to save these as I'm doing them because it'll help me come back and not have to figure out where I was going. Okay, so my normal map here actually has some information. This is from the sculpt, so I need to keep that stuff, and I'll show you how to do it real quick to combine it. Let's get the normal map over here, tarp, bump, what is that, dirt? I believe that the dirt is colored here, which is an oversight on my part while painting this. It should not be brown, it should be grayscale, and quick way is just Control, Shift, and U will desaturate. Okay, it's a nice handy hotkey. So I'm going to make a copy, Control Alt E of all layers minus the base mesh, and then run my X normal filter and just hit continue, and that pops it over. Now what I'm going to do is combine these, and all I do is I drag it up to norm, and if I drag back down here, you can see that the border got black. Now if I just let go, it's actually not placed in the center. So what's important when you do that is once you get it over and it switches to the new file, you drag down into here, you never let up, hold shift and let go. It's real simple. Okay, now how to combine these two. In this case, to be honest with you, I can pretty much just mask that out. I can just hold Alt here, and that's all I really need to do. But there's other details that may be underneath or above this that I may need. So let's not do that method. Let's do the right way, even though this does work. And what you do is pretty easy, but it's kind of hard to remember. Is just make a dupe, select this, the top one, come to your channels here, and highlight your blue channel, which has information on it. Okay, very simple information, but and very sparse information, but there is information in there, and there will be like 1% pixels and things that your eye won't see, but they're important to keep. And what you do is you take the blue channel on one of these layers and fill it with 50% gray. However, I found that 60% gray, which is actually past this set of primary colors here, is better in keeping the tones even. And you can see that what that did for that layer is it wiped out the blue channel for the most part. And then I'm going to hide that and select the next one. And all I need to do is fill in white in the red and the green. Okay, so blue is present, but red and green are wiped. And once you've done that, this layer becomes multiply. Okay, and if you look, you can see that it is there. And the layer that you went to even becomes overlay. Now if I hide the one with the blue channel, you see that there is a slight change in the tone, and it's important to maintain that for a true combining of your normal maps. Okay, you need to multiply and overlay, and once again, the one that's overlaid, you fill in, well, now that it's set to actually overlay, if I put it back to normal, you fill in the blue channel with 60% gray. Is better than 50% gray because it doesn't brighten the whole thing up, which it shouldn't, but it does, I've noticed. And this one, you wipe out the red and green with white, so that when you multiply, that white is ignored and only the tones that are left on the blue channel. Occasionally the blue channel is actually empty, like mathematically 100% empty, and in those cases you don't really need to worry about it, but it's a good practice to go through these steps anyway. And again, just make sure you dupe the layer, and make sure that when you do this layer, you're not showing this layer when you go over to your channels, and vice versa over here. And so that's how you combine two normal maps, detail and sculpt or whatever. So now I want to grab my reflection mask again and go to my channels, control, hit M, find the white. If it's easy, it's just easier to drag it. Hold in here and hold shift. I can't paint with black, but it's real easy to just delete that and then hit that, and you end up with the same thing. If I look, they're identical. So now my normal map U1 V2 is done. then I can, I guess I really should have saved those, but it doesn't matter. Let's go back to our original list. So now U2 V1. I am using a tablet pen, not my mouse, so I don't have scroll wheel. I probably should just be using my mouse. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Hit open. Same thing. Second verse, same as the first. Let's go to my diffuse. Process that really quick. Okay, show my base, grab that color, unlock that, fill that in, it's done. Let's get my specular. Fill with black. Remember to hit D first, and then it's Alt backspace to fill with your foreground color, and Shift. Oops, not Shift backspace actually gives you fill options, which is useful. But Control backspace fills with the white, and Alt backspace will fill with the black. Now X will switch which ones you have selected, which is foreground and background. So like if I pick green and then I pick red, I hit Alt backspace, it's red, Control backspace is green, Shift backspace lets me say 60% red. Okay, so just hit D, Alt backspace. It's real handy things to have there, hotkeys. And I'm not going to go through that, that weird rigmarole. Oh, actually, because I don't have that on the list, because it's off the list, I do need to do that other way of doing it, the copy merged. First fill in with black because we copied the white. And just Control V works nicely. Okay, Control Shift S. That is the diffuse texture done. I'm going to change this to details because I want to see a running list. And U2 V1. Keep my auth channels 32-bit. Yes, save. Spec. Yes, on the save. Okay. Normal maps I have, and bump maps I have. So same thing. Make a copy, Control Alt E in case I need to undo that, and just filter around the X normal. Continue. Okay. I'm going to drag that to my normal layer. Hold Shift when I let it go. Hide that, make a dupe. I'll do this one first. Control backspace on the red, Control backspace on the green to fill with complete white. Now the blue, I believe in this case, is another case of, well, no, there is some information there, so definitely need it. And then I hide that layer and select this layer. It's important. And I'm just going to fill with the 60% gray on the blue. Click back on RGB. This one is going to be multiply. This one is going to be overlay. Real simple way to remember that is if it's totally white, make it multiply. If it's gray looking here, make it overlay. And now I have a successful combination. Let's grab my reflection mask. Hide that. Drag this up here and hold Shift and let it go. Delete my off channel and create a new one. And that is the normal map for this one done. I did call that NM and this norm, but I'm going to stick with norm. I think it's fine. So I don't have to retype anything because I'm lazy. Just going to save these as I close them. And now we can go and get our last one, which is U2 V2. And just a note that when I was earlier, I called this U1 V1. It's actually U2 V2. Okay, this is U1 V1. My mistake on that. Diffuse here. You gotta blur it. Okay, let's get my spec. Come to layers here. Turn the other thing off. Let's make sure that the bump is, or the dirt is black and white. Control Shift U. Just a reminder on that one. Control Alt E for the copy. Reminder on that hotkey. X normal. Okay. Drag it to my normal map layer. Now I believe in this case there's actually nothing that was part of that sculpt that's here, so I don't need to do anything, which is good. This is going to be a classic case of warning: no pixels more than 50% selected. Edges will not be visible. I now officially have nothing to grab, so Control A C, Control A V. Still does not work. I don't get that. It used to work. If somebody knows, put a comment. Copy merged. And paste that. Alright. Let's check. I got U2 V1, U2 V1, U1 V2, U1 V2, U2 V1, U2 V1, U2 V2, U2 V2. Okay, U2 V2, V2, 2, 2, U2 V2. Gets a little tongue-tied. And let's just go ahead and make that norm so it's easier. Alright, so those are my textures, and we are officially done with Photoshop. But I'm going to keep it open because I may need to come back here after fiddling around in UDK. And here in Mudbox, I'm actually not going to save this file, and the reason is because I don't want to lose that mask being present here because I do like to paint on it. I am just going to make a new scene and not save it. Now, one of the things I do want to show real quick is something. Let's make another new scene. How I created, just close this. If I create a tiling plane here and just hit create tiling plane, and I hit W here, I'm actually looking at a 9x9 or 3x3, you know, 9 individual squares. And if I say grab a point like in the middle and move it, it tiles that for me. This is a good way to create a tiling texture. It's actually a really good way to do it. But what I wanted to show you really quick before I did anything is when I was doing my sculpts, I have a really easy time making wrinkles. And it's all in this stamp that actually comes with Mudbox, and it's actually off the screen here, but it's called V-Wrinkle VDM, which is a vector displacement mask, basically, map. And what it does, let's see what you need about 15 to 30 strength on this. And for those of you, I want to make sure that I have enough geometry, just 2 million polygons. And let's check the rest of my brush settings. For some reason it's not working on here. I must have something weird. Let me try a hard fall off. I think that might be the problem. Nope. It's probably that stamp spacing. Nope. It's a little better. I think what's going on is that I need to rotate this. Nope. Oh, here's a problem. I didn't have follow my stroke checked. There it is. Those of you who are familiar with ZBrush will probably find this closest to the Damien stamp thing, or Damien brush, or whatever they call that. And basically what it is it's kind of hard to explain. It's a sculpt and a pinch at the same time. If I keep going across the same spot, it deepens it, but it's also pinching it together. So what it ends up doing is it ends up like cleaning up areas around itself, and it's extremely useful for wrinkles. Like I can extend off of here, and if I keep going, and then I kind of cut in here and cut around here, it'll eventually kind of clean up the overlap. Not entirely, not like the wax brush would. The wax brush will literally merge it, but the if you start when you let's get back on here. If you start kind of light and then continue out, you can actually get a pretty nice blend. I am using my pressure sensitivity quite a bit, but if you're ever making wrinkles for clothing, use this stamp. Use this one that's called Wrinkle. It's extremely helpful. I just wanted to show you that because I pretty much did the entire sculpt with that. I used a little bit of the bulge brush, but really that stamp and the sculpt tool was what I used to create this normal map. and it really does just make it super easy. You don't have to fight with smoothing a lot. That's a huge thing to do. It does kind of need a higher resolution mesh, but it's pretty safe to start working on a relatively high reso mesh. I wouldn't go 10 million polys, but going to 800 to a million is actually a good starting point for your sculpting if you're only doing cloth. Usually you want to start at a lower res mesh and then build up, and keep subdividing as you need. And that would be more for characters, hard surface type things. But for cloth, you can actually start pretty high, especially using this brush, because it does, like I said, clean itself up by pinching and expanding and things like that. So just wanted to point that out. And now we're going to head into UDK. Alright, so the last half of this video pretty much lost its audio, and I don't know what happened, but it's in my source and everything, so I'm a little pissed, to say the least. I don't want to rage, but I decided to come back and voice this over, which does mean I kind of have to double encode this, which I think the quality is going to go down some, but whatever, there's nothing I can do about it. So alright, let's see what we're doing. We are looking at the unwrap here. Again, I'm not controlling it as I'm doing it now, but I think I was just highlighting the fact that the textures are unwrapped onto 4 separate tiles in UV channel 1. If you look on the right, there's map channel 1 under the channels over there. And so yeah, I think I'm just highlighting that right now. And I should probably end up showing UV channel 2. I'm kind of watching, I didn't watch this through before I did anything. So here's map channel 2, and this is where you can see that those different segments of the vehicle are actually now placed in their own quadrants that should match up to the Photoshop mask that's been created. And then we go into Photoshop, and those are the textures that got exported. And that is the mask that we're using. Mask Puny, and you can see that I have to zoom in real far because this texture is only 2 by 2, and I believe I show the image size on this. Yep, and you can see that the width and the height are 2 by 2 pixels. It doesn't need any more than that. I just need those squares. And RGB and the alpha channel each have a pixel in each quadrant of the texture, and that will serve as a perfect mask, which is basically 4 kilobyte image that doesn't take up any space whatsoever, but it's perfectly usable. And one thing to note, I don't know if I noted that in the first time, is that the to get those extra channels for the map channels into UDK, it is wise to keep the unwrap modifiers in the stack. Do not collapse that. Max will retain that information, but I don't believe that it comes into UDK if you collapse that. So here we are back in UDK. There's our mesh, which just has a default material. There are 2 materials on this mesh. There is one for the body and one for the glass. The glass having being a translucent type material requires a separate material, because as soon as you set something to have alpha channels, unless it is a masked version, which is basically a 1-bit channel, it will ghost the entire object even if your alpha channel is solid, and I find that extremely difficult to work with. So now I'm just kind of looking for the package, and I believe it is now time to import the textures that were generated. So I do the diffuse first so that they can all share the same setting, because sometimes if you do all of them at the same time, each time one comes in you have to click
switch it to no alpha and then normal map and then go back to alpha and default, and you got to keep going back and forth. So it's a good idea to, what if they're all going to share the same settings, to do them in blocks like that. That's kind of an important thing. And because those normal maps have an alpha channel, you need to use that TC normal map alpha type, not normal map. If you use regular normal map type, the alpha channel is either solid white or not there at all. So it is possible to have an alpha channel in a normal map. You just have to choose the setting TC normal map alpha, and that was a very, very important part that I was trying to highlight there. And I do believe I need to save the package, and here I'm just showing the fact that there is now an alpha channel because I used that compression setting. And I should show that, turn off the other channels, and then there is our reflection mask channel intact, working good, and it does not corrupt the rest of the normal map. That's a big part. That's an important thing. Don't know exactly what I'm saying here, but after a big texture import, you get a lot of textures in. It's a good idea to save the package because it needs to compress, and UDK can crash on you, and it's a pain in the butt to have to re-import all that stuff, set all that stuff up again. So once you get your textures in, it's a real good idea to save right away so that they're locked into the package, and the next time you open it up, whether or not you have to close it or from a crash, you don't have to do that again. So all of those textures are all going to be put on the same one model, all in the same one material. And let's see what I'm doing here. I think I ended up losing my place on the left over there. And there, that basic material that was put on there is what I decided to use because it's already named. Everything's fine. There was a bunch of stuff just to get a Fresnel and reflection and things like that in there to make it, you know, look kind of cool before we had textures built. You can see over there called from code. That's some extra stuff that's going to be used to generate the headlights, tail lights, and things like that. We're not going into that, so I just moved that out of the way, deleted everything else to start over from scratch pretty much. What's important is, because this is a skeletal mesh, I'm going down to show usage here. Used with skeletal mesh will want to be checked. If you are using it on a character or vehicle, anything that uses bones, make it a skeletal mesh. You want to make sure that that is checked. And once you do that, you can now bring in the mesh by selecting it and hitting that green arrow up at the top. And there you can see that the vehicle is now officially in the scene. I think I was looking around to see if there was a way to change the background color of this window, but it doesn't appear that there was that ability, so I just kind of skipped it. And right now I'm just showing a blank texture just so it will show up. And I use 0.8 instead of 1 just because it's not as bright. It doesn't go to full strength, 1 being full strength. Anything over 1, depending on your post-processing settings, will bloom. And now I'm just dragging in the textures, which is a nice handy feature. If you can get your content browser out of the way, you can literally just drag those in. And now I'm just arranging them in the order that they are in the quadrants, and I'm only doing that temporarily because it needs to be undone in the end. I believe the next step is to, I don't know what I'm showing here. Oh, I'm showing the UV sets, and you can see that UV set 0, everything got pushed over, and it looks like it's broken, but it's actually not. And then UV set 1 did come through clean, and you can see that that matches what was in max, and that will align with the mask. As you can see, I'm re-showing the mask to show the different quadrants. Now I type in puny because that's the name of my texture, and if you look, it's a nasty blur there, and I bring that up to explain how to get that to not be the case. I'm trying to look for the button that zooms the texture to the whole screen. I think I do eventually find it. There it is. And you can see that I am clean there, that those squares are sharp, and I should end up pointing over there to the right. Oh, and I'm highlighting the fact that the thumbnail does not look clean, it looks blurry, and it's the filter. And once I switch it to linear, you can see that it is now trying to blend across a couple of pixels to figure out what colors to use. It's the same thing as resizing in Photoshop. You know, you use nearest, bicubic, or whatnot. You only have two settings here, but pretty much nearest is the one that you want. And once you do that, it just says, okay, well, what's this pixel and what's the pixel next to it? So I'll use that to figure out my blending, and all you have is black and white, so you get a nice sharp square there on a simple 2x2 pixel, you know, 2x2 sized texture. Pixels are technically square, so that's all we really need. I think I was going into a little bit more of an in-depth explanation, but really I just said the same thing. If you are going to use this kind of mask type, just use the nearest filter type, and that is all you need to get this clean. So then I drag it into the scene, and I believe the first thing that I'm going to do is hook it right into the diffuse channel, just to illustrate that on texture coordinate 0 that it will just kind of blend those colors over the whole thing with no rhyme or reason, okay, based on each segment tiling. You can see that everything is pretty much multicolored, and that there isn't a lot we can do with that. You can see where the red on the tires and whatnot splits to green down the treads. That's not good. So what we do is we use a texture coordinate node. You can just type COO up there in the field, tie that together, and change the texture coordinate to 1 from 0. And that will match up with the second index channel in 3D Studio. And once you do that, you can see now that each segment of the vehicle is properly masked. Now that's how I broke it up into the different texture paint areas. We got the doors, we got the details, which is the red, the wheels are the black, which is in the alpha channel, and the body itself is in the green. So that's a good way to visualize what you are going to need. You can see that once I switch it to the actual alpha channel, that now just my wheels are white, everything else is black, so that's really all you need for your mask. So this is illustrating it more like the way a mask looks, you know, black and white. And then when I put it all together, it uses its colors, and we are good to go. Now here I'm showing the main diffuse channel being displayed on the vehicle. Now you can see that some parts are correct, like the believe the license plates and whatnot, this would be the details. The lights are good. All those smaller details that I painted that are on their own texture are in the right place, but it's also placing that texture across the surface of the entire model. And just showing that those details are on the red channel, which is my base channel, which would be the underlying layer. This method is pretty much the same thing as Photoshop. You know, just the way you mask layers on top of each other would be the same thing. And now I'm just showing another texture, and you can see that the details are broken, but the body itself has the correct texture. So all the textures lay out in their respective segments properly, but they will bleed over to everything else. So what I'm using is a linear interpolate, and that is the same thing as a mask in Photoshop. Now I'm just making a copy of those textures just to line them up a little bit easier in terms of how to lay this out, because organization is a big thing that you want to try to make sure is you know, you don't want a big spiderweb mess here. It's real important to stay organized. So linear interp works that the layer that's attached to B is actually on top of A, and then that is masked by whatever is hooked into the alpha channel. So you'll see me hook B up to something. Don't remember which one I picked. It has been a couple of days since I actually did this tutorial. And again, apologize for the audio being a little disconnected here. I really didn't realize that it cut out halfway through. So now I'm doing the details layer over the base layer, and I'm using that green channel because the details, or actually no, I'm using the body over the details. The details are on the red, the body's on the green, so that's why I chose the green channel. And you'll see now that the details and the body are correct. Okay, the masking is proper, but my wheels and my doors and my internal cab area is still not fixed. You can see that there, that the license plate and the details are now being bled over everything else because they are not yet masked. So when you do that, we've now created, you know, a simple expression. We've got two layers that are masked together, so that essentially becomes one layer. And now I'm showing attaching the wheel texture, which again, just using that by itself will bleed over the entire model. And now illustrating that the wheel texture is on the alpha channel, which shows up black until you actually, you know, use the alpha channel, then it will show up white. So when you do the next set of masking, your linear interpolate needs to actually go to the other linear interpolate. You don't want it to go to the individual textures. So those two combined became one layer, and now I'm putting the wheels on top of that whole layer, and I'm using its alpha channel, which is the alpha channel. You can see that the wheels are now in place, the body is in place, and the details are in place. However, our cab is still not in place because we don't have that masked over the top of everything. And now we're doing the last layer, which is the cab, and that goes to B because it's on top. A goes to the lerp, which is actually now two sets of expressions, which is essentially three layers, which became one layer. I don't know if that makes sense. And the cab was on the blue channel. And once we tie that into diffuse, now the model is properly textured 100%. Everything is officially correct. So 4 separate materials have been combined into one material. It does use the same amount of texture space as using 4 separate materials. However, it does not use 4 draw calls. It uses only 1. And a draw call is basically the same thing. If you have 4 materials on an object, you may as well have 4 objects in the scene, because it redraws the entire object for every one of those draw calls. So this method is being used in order to remove the draw calls. It essentially lets you place 4 times as many vehicles as you could if you just used separate materials for each one, because there would be 4 materials for the body, 1 material for the glass. So this vehicle would equal 5 objects in every time that it is drawn on the screen. Now it only equals 2. So it's not exactly 4 times as many, but you get the point. It now lets you optimize how many things you can have on the scene. And in a case of a drivable vehicle, you may wish to have a few of them, 5 to 100 of them. I wouldn't necessarily suggest putting 100 of them there, but so I think what I'm going to do here is just organize a little bit further. I'm showing that everything is working. I think I'm talking about what I just said about memory usage and things like that. We do use this on several objects, and we have not yet had any instance of lag. It does not seem to affect things. And the other thing is that we could use a 4096 texture image, but there are video cards out there that cannot handle that. And those video cards can handle 42048s. You would think, oh, well, it's the same thing, but technically no, it's not. A single 4096 is a bigger single chunk hit to the system. So okay, now I'm just going to comment this out, call it the diffuse diff, and move that out of the way. And the reason I made a copy of it was because the alpha channels are existent for the specular channel is in the alpha channels of each one of those textures. So all I need to do is make a duplicate of it and switch every place that it's going to the RGB, and just switch that to the alpha channel for each texture. And that's what I'm doing here. Just hooking those up. And that goes to the specular channel. And you can see now that all of those specular things that I painted in Mudbox and put into the those channels are now affecting the model quite nicely. And I'm just going to comment that, call that the spec channel. And now I believe I'm going to do the normal maps. I'm selecting all of the nodes and then hitting Control W there, and that just is like basically saying copy and paste in one operation. I tie that directly into the normal maps just to get it assigned, and then I show that that's totally broken. Obviously that's not going to work. It's the wrong color altogether. Now all I do is I go and I change the name from diff to norm. You can see me typing that in the texture field. And what this illustrates is the importance of a good naming convention, because it does allow you to do this kind of thing. I don't need to drag in the normal maps. I find that the normal maps are very hard to decipher what they are without looking at the names of them. Just by looking at the preview there, it does look like a blob of blue and very hard to visualize. So keeping a good naming convention just allows me to rename the texture nodes from diff to norm on each one. And I have effectively created my normal map channel, and it is done, and it is working. You can see that the rivets are there. The seats have their normal map. I believe it's time to move the light around, and the normal map is functioning properly on there. And that pretty much takes care of the normal maps, so that's done and good. Now the reflection mask is in the alpha channels for the normal maps. So all I'm doing here is just organizing again. I'm just kind of spinning around to show that it's working and that I'm happy with it. And a lot of times I stop at this point. I'd be done. The model would be finished. Got my specular, diffuse, and normal map. I don't often mess with the gloss layer, but it is a good thing to do. Now I'm going to work on the reflection mask. Now this was new for me when I did this. It worked out pretty quick, but basically all I'm doing is the same thing that I did to the diffuse to get the specular channel out. I'm just swapping from the RGB to the alpha on each one of these, and that is where I put my reflection mask on each one. And keeping in mind that you do need to have the whole expression available. So now I have a blended mask. Now I'm going to bring up, I believe, the content browser here, which I accidentally brought up Kismet because I'm dumb. And there we go. And now I'm going to type in reflection, I believe, or ref or something. I need to find a good cube map. So I just type in REFLE, and that will bring up anything with that string in it. And I'm looking for a good cube map, something that is generic enough to work in any case. But one of the things that's important is that these cube maps be probably be a material instance, so that you can, and make the texture a parameter, so that you can swap out cube maps for whatever environment that they're in. And you can actually do that in code if you say wanted to transition from one room or one area to another and you needed that to swap on the fly. You could use volumes or something to trigger that, and then run code to switch the texture. So the texture type is texture sample parameter cube, and with that main cube map texture selected, that will come in. Now I go ahead and I tie that into diffuse, and because it's a texture type cube, now you can see which one I picked. I just picked one that came with UT game. It was just a generic grass with sky and some mountains around it. It worked fine for the purposes here. Now I tie it right into the diffuse map, and you can see that it's going to break. It pretty much doesn't work because it's missing the kind of coordinates that it needs to be. You can't just place a cube map on an object. So I type in ref and I get reflection vector, and that's pretty much all you need to tie into the UVs, and that will instantly put the reflection on the model. And that you can see that that's just on the top of everything because I just slapped it right into the diffuse. So there you have, you know, pretty much mirror chrome. It is properly using the normal maps, which is a good thing. You don't have to worry about that. And now all I do is need to blend this out with a mask. And in order to do that, I want where it's not reflecting to just be black. So I just take that node, type in 0, and that becomes black. And I should pop out a new linear interpolate. And I put the reflection over black, and the alpha channel is my mask system that is in the alphas for the normal maps there. Okay, now I should slap that right into the diffuse to see how it looks. And now my reflection mask is working. You can see it doesn't reflect on the wheels, doesn't reflect heavily on everything. It does on the rims, it does on the lights. Anything I wanted to set, not on the seats at all, they're not going to have any reflection. But the metal is reflecting based on my masking system. So it's working real nice. And it turned out to be actually quite a bit easier than I expected it to be. I thought I was going to have to run through a lot of layering. And then once that's set, all I need to do is organize it. And do an add from that to the diffuse. So it just basically layers itself right on top. Add the two together. And put that in diffuse. And there we go. I have reflection on my metal, not on my tires, not on my seats or my cloth or my steering wheel or my pedals or anything like that. It's all hand chosen, which was the whole, pretty much the main point. Couldn't use the specular channel because some of those things have specular in them, which is why I decided to paint an actual reflection mask in Mudbox. And Mudbox is nice. There is a channel called reflection mask, so you can visualize it pretty easy. Now I didn't like how strong it was. I thought it was a little strong, so I'm gonna simply multiply it by a smaller value. And right now that scalar parameter is just 0. So once I actually multiply it by that, it's just gonna knock the reflection out completely. You can see that is essentially the same thing as adding 0, so I didn't add anything. We're back to normal. And now I'm just going to give myself a little bit of strength to figure out how much I want that reflection strength to come through. So I tried it by half. I think I end up with 0.25 or 0.3 or something weird. I don't exactly remember what I go with, but I don't like my reflections to be overly strong. I don't find that they look all that realistic, so just a slight bit of tonal shift is what I'm after. And also doing it light like this affords you the ability to just kind of, I don't really even need to swap that reflection out. There's something being reflected in there, but you can't really tell exactly what it is. I ended up making it 10 just so it would look hilarious. Just illustrating the fact that you can change the strength to anything you want. So that's super strong there. Making a chrome if you wanted to. And I believe I end up with 0.25 as my final. Final strength there. Now the smoothing groups on this model did need a little bit of work. Didn't actually show that in this video, but there's a bit of reflection bending going on in the doors and whatnot because their smoothing groups are basically not set. So you can see the triangle of dark that goes across the door. That is merely a smoothing group issue. It's not a big deal at all. Anybody who models knows how utterly easy that is. Okay, now I'm working on the specular power. And I just tie in the specular channel. And specular power is not on a scale from 0 to 1. It's basically on a scale from about 1 to 160, being matte looking to very glossy. A power of 0 actually will look cell shaded. Can be useful for some cases if you wanted to do that, but in this case I did not want that. I'm just showing 0 here You can see the hard edge there on the highlight. It's very undesirable in this case. And I think I'm trying to find the default, and I do figure out that the default specular power, if you do not plug anything into that, the default is 15. And what I did was I put in 1. Now 1 is the minimum that you want to go. That will give you a pretty matted surface. The dispersal of the light will be very broad, but it does pretty much avoid the hard-edged, cell-shaded look where the highlight just literally cuts off. And like I said, if you want that, then you can use that, but I don't want that. Now I unplug it to see if I see any noticeable difference, and I do. It did get tighter, which means that the specular power was higher, so I determined that 15 was the default. I believe that's in the documentation, I just couldn't remember it. Just wanted to show what it was when you default it. So I set it to 15, and then I disconnect it from the specular power channel, and there is no difference. You don't see the lighting change at all. Once it's done, boom, nothing, no change. If you were looking at the model there, it wouldn't have, you wouldn't have seen nothing. Now I go real high with 90. Now that's going to give you kind of a pinpoint light highlight. And this would be for like glass, some metals, depending on the kind of metal. Very shiny, very new metal would be very, very shiny. And the shinier it is, the more reflective it is, the tighter that the highlight gets. So depending on your kind of material that you want. But for dirty metal, I believe I go with something quite a bit less. So I do want a relatively broad scattering of light here. And now I believe what I do is tie this into the specular channel. It's very important for me to note here that you can and probably should, if it's important to you, create a gloss map, which specular power is gloss. But you probably want to create textures for that if it's important to you, especially like on something for going for high levels of realism. So what I'm doing is just using the specular channel itself. Now you can see I multiplied everything by 4, but what happened is that the things in that texture that were black or very, very dark have dropped the value, the final value, below 1. So what I did was boost that up to 60, and now those very low values are dropping it down close, higher than 1. I cannot tell you what each pixel's value is because I'm going from the entire 255 range on a texture. So I went with 60 just to make sure that it was high enough, and I just want to inspect your model like I'm doing here. So I'm just going around looking, seeing if I like everything. I think I talk about how the fact that I didn't have any specular at all on the seats, and I didn't like that. It's supposed to be leather. I wanted that to have some specular, and I do believe I fixed that. But that is a Photoshop fix. So I have to go into Photoshop here and just look for the thumbnail that shows the seats, and there they are. You can see it in the thumbnail. And if you look at the alpha channel here, the seats are black. They have no specular value whatsoever, and I don't like that. So I need to open up the Photoshop file, and I need to remember which image it was. So I go to specular there, and I look up at the top. U2V1 is the one that I'm looking for. So I go over to the actual layers and I just hold Control and click on the seats layer, I believe. Well, actually no. What I do is I hide everything but the seats, and I grab its RGB values by getting the sampling the actual channel. Now I'm showing here that you can right click with the move tool to get a list of all the layers that share pixels in the spot that you click, which is very, very handy if you have a file that has umpteen number of layers, being hundreds or even 20. It'd be real hard to find something in that list if you're not grouped and organized. So if you're having trouble finding your layer and they're not named, you can right click and pick each one just to see which, go through the list and see which one is the correct one. So what I do is I hide everything but the seats, and I go to my channels and I just hold Control and hit the RGB, and just as a test I try filling that in. You can see that I'm picking the wrong spot, so I do need to flip the selection and then intersect it with the seats layer, and you do that by holding Control and Shift and Alt and clicking on the thumbnail for the layer, and that will give you a little X icon. And you can see that I've done that there, and not a lot shows up, but when I paste that into that layer, you can see that now I brought in an alpha channel that is based off of that layer. I found that a little too strong, so I used Shift backspace eventually. I'm also having issues seeing through that dancing set of lights, so you can hit Control H to hide your selection borders, and then Shift backspace brings up the options, and you can say, okay, well I only want to fill in, say 20%, and there it is. I found that a little too low or a little too high, so I went with 10%. And I didn't like that, so I went with 15, something in the middle, because I do want some specular there. Hit Control, I'm just going back and forth showing Control H to illustrate the fact that those are really irritating, but you can hide it. And then I believe I saved it. Got to do a TGA, and it was U2 V1 overwrite. I couldn't do it because I had opened it, so I just needed to close that before I save it, which sucks because then I have to go back in Photoshop and refine my spot. But the recent places folder is very handy. If that doesn't work for you, I feel bad for you. So it's saved. It's now got alpha information in that, and all I need to do is re-import the texture and look at the seats, see what's going on. It's not showing anything because I had a search field in there, so I just cleared that. Right click, re-import texture. That'll come in. And it replaces that. Takes a second, obviously. It's a 2048, it's a little bit larger. And now I can look at the seats, and if you look at the top, it's a little hard to see because I did keep it pretty toned down. I didn't want them super shiny. But there is a reflection if you look at the top part of the seat. You can see it there. That it now has some specular level to it. You can see it on the top of the back seat moving around. There it goes. Pretty easy to see there. Normal maps are all working. So I was happy with that. And I think I was happy, yeah. I believe I hit the green check up at the top. Closed it down, and I was going to apply it to the model, but that material already was applied to the model. I kind of forgot that. So it's like, oh yeah, it already had the material on it because I replaced it, so it just switched. And now the model is done. All textured up, all nice and neat, looking pretty. Reflections were working, glass was working, so I saved the package. Hide everything, and then I think it was time to just run a little run around test for fun. Open up our little test map here, which we have it placed. You see it's just a barn floating on a spot, and this is our asset placement test. Flying around showing a couple things. Our vehicles right now only work in UT game, not in our own game, so our R.A.T.S aren't going to be able to drive in there. And I'm showing the Jeep, which uses the exact same thing, except it doesn't have the reflection on it. That was the only difference. And then I hit play, and you come in as one of the little robots and drive it around and look at how the lighting shifts. Now it does actually have some weird lighting stuff going on, but really the lighting just needs to be rebuilt. Regenerated, because this is a skeletal mesh. There's just the one light in the scene that's not really affecting this properly. This object doesn't have its settings done. You can see that it starts flashing there, like opposites of itself, and that is just a simple issue with the lighting of the level. It doesn't have anything to do with the mesh. Well, it's either the lighting of the level or the light environment settings on the object. You see no shadows are hitting on the object or anything like that. So its light environment's broken, and then I slam into the Jeep, and I think I end the video. So thanks for watching. Sorry for the audio again. And I get a little highlight of it in the pretty moonlight, but I couldn't find the moon. There it is. And that's it. Ta-da!